Welcome to Big Blues Explorations. Today you join me from the resort of Verbier, one of the most famous ski resorts in the world. Not just among Europeans, but with Americans and anyone who likes to ski. This resort is made up of apparently 400 kilometers of skiing. Yes, 400 kilometers of skiing if you take all the runs, including the yellow off-piste terrain and the valleys and all the runs that you could do down the off-piste, then 400 kilometers. Otherwise, it's only about 200 kilometers of actual piste. And when I was there, the piste conditions were quite ludicrously awful. The problem with the pistes there is that they like to have runs that have not man-made snow and runs that don't have man-made snow. On the runs going down to resorts to the base, they really need to have some snow. My skis got quite sharped up with stones, so I'm not very happy about that. Even though if they'd had a little bit of snow on top, it would have made the whole experience much better, and especially because of how busy it was. The good thing about the Four Valleys is that a lot of people do not always go out to the outer reaches. Because in the Four Valleys you've got Nendas and Vizon and Thion, and Verbier, which are much better places overall than Verbier, but we'll get to that in the coming videos. What I did find was that Mount Fort was the most challenging entrance to a run I have seen in all my time of skiing. There wasn't a lot of snow this year at the top of Verbier earlier in the season, so the entrance that was crafted with the piste bashers was not very elegant. There was literally one was a jumping turn to get from snow to snow rather than avoid the rock, and then the other one was slide down literally on an edge that was about a foot wide, not to crash into the rock, and then as soon as you get to the bottom, turn sharply and then start with these gigantic moguls, which were, half a metre deep in some places. Mostly they were manageable. After the first 20 metres, it became a good, decent off-piste black. And I skied all the way down the first section, and then onto the yellow run, which took me right down to the bottom of the aerial tram. This run was really nice. Lots of powder still, even though it hadn't snowed for a few days. I did get to one section where I actually had to drop. I swung myself in and dropped about 6 feet or 7 feet from my boots to the floor, so about 12 feet in total, because I had gone the wrong way, and it was about 3 o'clock at this time, and the lift was closing at 3:15, which I hadn't realised at that point. So it was good that I was actually in a position that I could get myself out of it without having any serious injury. What I also found out that day is that when I was skiing the runs, especially towards the top, they were a lot better than the runs at the bottom, and with a little bit more snow than they had, maybe half a foot of fresh challenging stuff would have made all the difference. But overall, I think the top of Verbier on my first day of skiing was much better than skiing the lower reaches of Verbier. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this another Big Blues exploration, and please enjoy the rest of the videos from this series. My rating for Verbier as a whole is quite low, about 6 to 7.5. I will explain why. So for the pistes and runs in Verbier itself, it gets a 6.5 for the overall lack of care taken compared to what they should have done. The lift infrastructure gets a solid 8, 8.5 in some places. The value and cost of things gets a 5 because of how expensive the restaurants and bars and stuff like that were. Even the lift pass was one of the most expensive I've ever seen, even more than San Moritz. And that's saying something. When San Moritz, the origin of modern day skiing and the massive luxury destination, is cheaper than Verbier, then you can see there's some issues there. So overall experience, again, about a 7.5. So giving Verbier a total of 7.5. I didn't eat at the restaurants on the mountain this time just because they were so ludicrously expensive, but I did see some options towards Nendaz which were much more reasonable. But overall, it felt like they weren't wanting most people to eat there, they were just wanting people with money to eat and go to Verbier, which I suppose is their prerogative, and that's why everything is so expensive. But it's a shame for a resort trying to push out the majority of people in return for a smaller minority of the pie.